Mal Fletcher chairs the organization 2020 Plus. It's a think tank which looks at social affairs and leadership. They say they help businesses, communities, and individuals to deal proactively with future change. I'm delighted to say that Mal joins me on the line now. A very good morning to you, sir.
And you, Mike.
Thanks for taking the time to be with us. How important is it that people actually go and vote on Thursday?
Well, that's the big question, I think, in all of this. There are some polls suggesting that as many as 40% of 18 to 24-year-olds in the UK won't vote, and as we've just heard from your piece, a lot of older people too. And I think that's partly driven by scepticism about promises and trustworthiness of politicians. That's understandable. Since 2009, I guess every major foundational institution in the country has been called into question, from the banks, Westminster, the courts, media, press, and so on. But turning mistrust or scepticism, Mike, into an excuse not to vote is to mistake anarchism for activism, in my view. Not voting might seem like a convenient way to voice a protest, but actually it's still casting a vote, albeit one that can't bring about any positive change.
But what happens if you can't pick anybody to vote for, of all the people that's available?
Well, I think it's a responsibility, it's a social responsibility. It's my right not to vote, of course. It's part of my freedom in a liberal democracy. But it's a social responsibility to try as hard as I can to find something, some way forward. And I think the decision about who you vote for is partly about what kind of city or town you want to live in 5 years from now. How can I set that in motion with my vote? Obviously, these days we don't have a lot of real knowledge of our local MPs very often, but the question is, are they trying to move things in the direction we'd like to see on the issues we care about? And then there's the bigger question of what kind of country do I want to be living in 5 years from now? What are the biggest problems that have to be solved? Which of the parties appear on current appearances to have the policies and the capability to solve those problems? The trust issue is a huge one in this election. I understand that, but I feel that activism sees a clear vision of the preferred future and tries to find ways, even if it's hard to find them, to make that come about.
But there's still a struggle between the heart and the mind. You might want to vote for a minority party because, we're not going to name anybody, but because you like the policies that they stand for. But then you think, would that be a wasted vote? And then you decide that you'll have to put your vote into one of the bigger parties.
Yeah, I mean, there will be that, and there'll be some tactical voting too, as you mentioned earlier. There's studies all over the world that show when it comes to making any sort of decision, human beings tend to use a little bit of heart and mind. When it comes to elections, especially close elections, emotion plays a much bigger role than we might think, especially when people are confused about the policies on offer, or if we can't see a lot of difference between the various parties. And in this election, I think promises are flying around thick and fast everywhere, and if you believe the polls, no one party is really bridging the trust deficit more than the others. So for many of us, I think, even unconsciously, there will be a falling back on emotions, driven either by a leader's personality or by party loyalty that's part of our local culture, or perhaps our past voting record, or even, in some cases, a culture that's inherited from our parents.
Have we heard enough from the religious community on this election? Because I don't think we have.
I suspect we haven't. I'm not sure how much of that is press and media obtrusiveness. I'm not sure that it's not too much that. I think in some cases the religious community in our country, Mike, has, in my humble opinion anyway, sort of given up trying to have a voice in these areas. And I suppose it would be true to say that religious people, by and large, face the same challenges as everybody else, just trying to work through what is a real, legitimate promise. And I think we have to remember that politicians play two roles here. They're supposed to solve problems. That's their number one vocation, if you like. But the second one, more indirectly, they support the kind of culture that shapes our nation. That is our sense of who we are. And in that sense, people of religious faith, I think, have an important voice, needs to be heard.
But the Bishop of Manchester, speaking to us here, says that the political parties haven't engaged enough with the religious communities.
Well, that may be true, but I would dare to suggest, with due respect, that it's the religious community's responsibility to engage with the political process. Politicians, I suppose, are trying to negotiate their way through all the various groups, major groups, faith and no faith, throughout the community. And I think the onus is on religious groups themselves to engage. And I come back to that point about a point that was made recently about the fact that the no vote is actually a road to personal powerlessness. If we don't get involved, we don't speak up. Psychologists talk about links between a perceived loss of control and the onset of certain types of depression, for example. If we start feeling our choices don't count, that we don't have a role in producing change, then our self-confidence leaks away, and there's frustration and anger as a result. So in a sense, aside from the fact that it ignores social responsibilities, not engaging the process is the least self-caring option.
Have you decided who you're going to vote for?
I pretty much have now, yes. Although I have to admit, it's taken me a long time to come to the decision.
Well, I won't ask you who it is. By the way, can I just correct something? It was the Bishop of Salford who made that comment, by the way. The Bishop of Manchester will be joining us later. Can I thank you very much indeed for taking time to speak to us, Mal? All the very best for the future.
Thank you, Mike.
Cheers.